How much pain can one man carry before the world finally sees the truth? For more than 4 decades, Denzel Washington has stood as one of the most formidable forces in modern cinema. Admired not only for extraordinary talent, but for an integrity that refuses to break. On screen, he commanded armies, confronted injustice, and forged performances that burned themselves into film history. From the righteous fury of Malcolm X to the ruthless power of Training Day, from the defiant dignity of Fences to the battlefield courage of Glory, his presence helped define an era of Hollywood. But Hollywood is a machine that destroys careers and devours lives. Somehow, Denzel Washington became something rarer than fame. A man respected for character. The world sees the strength, the voice of authority, the iron composure. Yet behind the legend stands a far harsher story. He rose from a fractured home with almost nothing but faith, discipline, and a fire that refused to die. Millions admire him, but few understand the losses, the battles, and the scars carved into the road behind that glory. And now, at 71, one question demands an answer. What is truly happening to Denzel Washington today? Beyond the fame, beyond the legend, in the shadows where even greatness must face time. If his strength and character have ever inspired you, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the truth behind the legend is far more powerful than the world has ever seen. How cruel it is that the first great wound in Denzel Washington's life came not from failure, poverty, or the brutal pressure of Hollywood, but from the collapse of the very home meant to protect him. For Denzel Washington, that wound was carved long before the world ever knew his name. He was born on December 28, 1954, in Mount Vernon, New York, a working-class town just beyond Manhattan where faith and hardship lived side by side. In the 1950s, the community was close-knit and resilient. Church every Sunday, long work days, families surviving on determination more than comfort. At the center of Denzel's early life stood a small beauty salon on Nelwood Avenue run by his mother, Lennis. The room hummed with dryers and the scent of chemicals and hot combs. The sound of a woman exhausting herself to raise 3 children. David, Denzel, Enya and little Loris. Her love was fierce, protective, relentless. His father, Reverend Denzel Hayes Washington Sr., a Pentecostal minister and city worker, was a stern man shaped by scripture, discipline, and duty. Their home had prayers before meals and sermons on Sundays, yet warmth was scarce and affection rarely spoken. Years later, Denzel captured the fragile tension in one line. "My mother was city. My father was country. Opposites attract. And then they separate." Even as a boy, he felt the strain. A house where love existed, yet often stood hidden behind restraint. That restraint eventually hardened into something permanent. By 1968, when Denzel turned 14, the home once filled with gospel hymns and routine had broken apart. There were no violent arguments, no dramatic finale. Only the slow disappearance of the family he believed would always stand. "They were like night and day," he later said. When the divorce came, the fracture felt internal, as if something inside the boy had split with it. He stayed with his mother while his father drifted farther away, fading from presence into memory. Years later, Denzel spoke with disarming honesty. "I didn't cry when he died, not because I didn't love him, but because we never really connected. Few wounds cut deeper than loving someone whose heart you never truly reached. That emptiness left space inside him. And the streets of Mount Vernon rushed to fill it. On corners stood boys chasing danger the way others chased dreams. Trouble became courage. Recklessness became belonging. "The guys I hung with did 40 years combined," he once said. They went one way, I went another." Behind that sentence lay a chilling truth. The distance between his life and theirs had been dangerously small. One wrong step, one more year drifting those streets, and the future that would one day inspire millions might have vanished. Sometimes the deepest scars are not the tragedies that happened, but the life you almost lost. But his mother saw the storm forming before he did. She recognized the terror every parent fears, that the world might swallow a child before he learns how to fight back. So she made the most painful decision of her life. At 14, she sent him to Oakland Military Academy in New Windsor, New York. To the boy she loved, it felt like betrayal. The mornings were merciless, boots striking pavement before sunrise, icy air cutting through his uniform, ink commands echoing across the yard without patience for fear or homesickness. The place felt rigid and unforgiving. Yet what seemed punishment was in truth the fiercest act of love she could give. Years later, he would remember the moment she left him there. The smell of starch in his uniform, the firmness in her voice, the tears she refused to show. Decades later, he finally understood. "I think my mother saved my life," he said quietly. "It was the best thing that could have happened to me." Within those disciplined walls, he learned what the streets never offered: endurance, humility, restraint, and the strength hidden in hardship. "Discipline became my first language," he said, "the one my mother taught me without words." When he returned home, the streets of Mount Vernon no longer owned him. The restless boy had changed course. Yet the mark of those years never disappeared. It lived in the pauses of his voice, the intensity in his eyes, the gravity that later shaped his performances. What his mother gave him was greater than rescue. She forced chaos into order, turned heartbreak into discipline, and transformed a boy on the edge of disappearing into a man capable of carrying enormous weight. By the time the world discovered Denzel Washington, the defining battle of his life had already been fought. Not under Hollywood lights, but inside a Mount Vernon home where a determined mother refused to let her son be lost. Crushingly, survival had already carried Denzel Washington this far, but survival alone would never be enough. The boy who had escaped a fractured home now faced a harsher opponent: the world itself. When he arrived at Fordham University in the early 1970s, New York felt vast, cold, and indifferent. Winter winds cut through his thin coat. His pockets were as empty as his stomach. And some nights he lay awake counting the hours until dawn just to quiet the hunger twisting inside him. The narrow dorm bed groaned with every turn while the radiator coughed weak bursts of heat into the freezing room. In the cafeteria, he sometimes nursed a single cup of coffee he couldn't afford to refill, pretending the smell of other people's meals might dull the ache. "I didn't know what I wanted," he later admitted with disarming honesty. "I was just trying to survive." Back in Mount Vernon, his mother's small beauty salon could barely keep its lights on, so there was little help to send. Denzel worked anywhere that would take him. Sweeping hallways as a janitor, delivering newspapers before sunrise, running trays in cafeterias, hauling boxes in the backs of trucks. Soap and grease clung to his hands, rain soaked through worn shoes, and exhaustion followed him like a second shadow. Yet even on the coldest nights, he still walked the streets alone, whispering lines from plays he had never performed, staring up at the glowing skyline. Beautiful, distant, unreachable. "The city didn't see me," he would later reflect. "Not yet." Suddenly, in the most ordinary place imaginable, destiny whispered his name. In the summer of 1975, he took a small job at a YMCA camp in Lakeville, New York, teaching children to swim for a few dollars a day. One evening, the camp held a talent show. When a performer failed to appear, someone pushed Denzel forward to fill the empty spot. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the light. The children laughed, counselors clapped, and somewhere in the crowd, a woman leaned forward and said words that would echo through the rest of his life. "You were born to act." Something inside him shifted in that instant. It wasn't applause he heard. It was direction. When he returned to Fordham, the drifting stopped. He switched his major to drama and graduated in 1977, thinner than ever, but burning with a new certainty. A scholarship soon carried him west to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. Yet the dream demanded its price. His rented room was small and damp, smelling faintly of old wood and ocean salt blown in through cracked windows. Some nights dinner was nothing more than bread and tap water. Wrapped in a worn coat, he rehearsed lines beneath the flicker of a dying bulb. "The Pacific wind bit through my jacket," he later recalled, "but the stage lights kept me warm." Relentlessly, the fight continued long after the dream had begun. After a year in San Francisco, he returned to New York with little more than a suitcase and a worn Bible. Broke, restless, but stubbornly determined. He auditioned everywhere that would let him step inside the room. The answer was almost always the same: "We'll call you." Most never did. Some nights he slept on friends' couches, other nights on bare floors or in waiting rooms that smelled of stale coffee and disappointment. And he wasn't homeless, but he knew the hollow feeling of not belonging anywhere. "Each no felt like a door slamming on my future," he later said. But faith kept me knocking. Then quietly, one door opened. Wilma, 1977. A small television film about an Olympic runner gave him his first foothold. The pay barely covered rent, but it kept him standing long enough for the next step. That step arrived in 1982 with Saint Elsewhere, the role that finally introduced him to the world. Yet even as cameras rolled, he carried the past with him: the hunger, the winters, the sleepless nights, the rooms of rejection. His rise was never sudden. It was carved slowly through endurance. Every empty stomach, every unanswered call, every moment of doubt became another prayer he refused to abandon. The world had offered him almost nothing. So Denzel Washington built his future with stubborn faith, relentless work, and a fire that refused to die. By the time the world began to recognize his greatness, he had already paid for it in hunger, faith, and years of perseverance no one else had seen. Brutally, the price of greatness revealed itself long after the applause began. The young man who once counted coins for bus fare had risen beneath the brightest lights in Hollywood. Yet every spotlight that found Denzel Washington cast a shadow he alone had to cross. His ascent was never truly about fame. It was about faith tested by fire and purpose carved out of hardship. Cry Freedom cracked the door open, earning him his first Academy Award nomination and giving his voice a platform for truth. Then came Glory, the performance that brought him the Oscar and revealed the essence of his art. Dignity forged through suffering. Denzel never approached those roles as mere acting. He carried them in his bones. Every tear, every pause on screen came from somewhere deeper than technique. Glory, Malcolm X, Philadelphia. You're the Hurricane. Film after film became a scar transformed into storytelling, a prayer hidden inside cinema. By the time Training Day arrived, the world saw him as unstoppable. An actor capable of embodying corruption while still protecting the last ember of humanity beneath it. Yet the triumph audiences celebrated concealed a private exhaustion: 16-hour days, scripts heavy with moral weight, nights spent whispering lines until they finally rang true. Sometimes he remained alone in his trailer long after filming ended, staring into the mirror. Not as a movie star, but as a man asking himself why he had started this journey at all. Every victory costs something, he later reflected. You pay for it in time, in sleep, in peace. And yet those sacrifices slowly built a legacy few actors ever reach. 2 Academy Awards, 9 nominations, and a body of work that would shape modern American cinema. Sharply, the most defining battle of his career unfolded far from any camera. In 1986, before the world fully knew his name, Denzel was offered a role that promised prestige and money, but demanded a dangerous compromise. The script twisted race into spectacle, turning human pain into entertainment. Under the cold glare of a casting room light, he felt something heavier than ambition pressing against him. That night, he called the man who had already walked this difficult road, Sidney Poitier. Poitier's advice arrived with quiet gravity. The first few films you choose will define who you are. Denzel closed the script and set it down. He walked away. In that moment, he turned from the easy door of fame toward the far harder road of principle. But years later, he would still look back on it with calm certainty. That was the best decision I ever made. The years that followed were not gentle. Some rooms were cold. Some doors closed without explanation. Doubt lingered in the eyes of people who questioned whether integrity had any place in Hollywood. Yet he endured, not to become famous, but to make sure his name stood for something real. Gradually, Denzel Washington became more than a celebrated actor. He became a rare moral center in an industry built on illusion. "I don't want movie star friends," he once said plainly. "I want honesty." In a world driven by spectacle, his integrity became its own quiet rebellion. Unexpectedly, the higher his reputation rose, the more his compassion expanded. When the attacks of September 11th shattered New York, Denzel returned not as a celebrity, but as a son of the city that had shaped him. Amid smoke, twisted steel, and firefighters sitting in stunned exhaustion, he stood silently where grief hung in the air like dust. "It changed me," he later admitted. "I saw people just sitting there, completely spent." In that moment, success began to mean something different. Quietly, he started helping younger artists find opportunities he once struggled to reach, including funding the education of a young actor named Chadwick Boseman. Years later, when Chadwick stood beside him and addressed him respectfully as "Sir," Denzel simply smiled and replied, "Just call me brother." After Boseman's passing, that single word, brother, carried a weight that lingered long after the camera stopped rolling. "He gave everything," Denzel said softly. "He was grace." For every award resting on his shelf, there were also unseen lives lifted along the way. Steadily, through decades of fame and scrutiny, he remained something rarer than a star, a grounded human being. When rumors once circled about detox or scandal, he answered with calm simplicity, "I just take care of myself. You have to clean the body to clear the mind." Discipline had always guided him more than headlines. Even his small fears became lessons in humility. Laughing once about developing a fear of heights, he joked, "If there's a balcony scene, let's shoot it first." It was never weakness, only wisdom earned through years of navigating illusion without losing himself. Today, after more than 4 decades in cinema, Denzel Washington stands at the summit of his craft. A 2-time Academy Award winner, a performer whose films have shaped generations, and a man whose influence extends far beyond the screen. Yet the applause that once defined success no longer matters as much as something quieter. Character, purpose, faith. Because in the end, the real story of Denzel Washington was never about fame at all. It was about remaining true when no one is watching. And that is why his legacy endures, not simply as a legend of Hollywood, but as proof that integrity, carried through hardship, can illuminate the lives of others. Tenderly, one of the most remarkable stories in Denzel Washington's life was never written on a movie screen. It was written inside a marriage that refused to break. Long before awards, red carpets, or flashing cameras, his greatest blessing arrived quietly. In 1977, while filming the modest television movie Wilma, Denzel met Pauletta Pearson, a classically trained pianist whose calm presence felt like still water in a restless world. He was an unknown actor trying far too hard to impress. She simply watched, amused by the nerves he tried to hide. Months later, fate crossed their paths again at a play in Atlanta. Pauletta slipped into her seat late, and by chance, it was beside him. "That's when it started," Denzel would later say with a smile that still sounded surprised. On their first date, she reached for the bill before he could. It's like she paid, he laughed, and that's how I knew she was the one. They married on June 25th, 1983, far from Hollywood spectacle. Just two young dreamers standing in a small chapel, promising forever with little more than faith. Their first apartment was tiny, the wallpaper peeling, the rent often late. But in the corner sat a second-hand piano where Pauletta played hymns at night while Denzel studied scripts by the window. When their first son was born, he held the child against his chest and whispered, "Someday I'll make you proud." Some nights the baby cried while he warmed milk with one hand and rehearsed lines with the other. Pauletta would laugh softly and remind him, "You can't rehearse fatherhood." They had almost nothing, except love, lullabies, and the stubborn belief that tomorrow would come. Slowly, success arrived, and with it came a cost that fame rarely admits. Films like Cry Freedom, 1987, Glory, 1989, and Malcolm X, 1992, lifted Denzel from promise into legend. The world began to celebrate him, but inside the house, another reality unfolded. 16-hour days stretched into months away from home. The work was relentless, he later admitted. The applause of strangers grew louder while the laughter of his children grew distant. Pauletta became the quiet center of the home, cooking, teaching, praying, soothing fevers in the middle of the night. "My wife did the heavy lifting," Denzel would say with humility. "I worked, but she raised the kids." While he filmed in Los Angeles or Philadelphia, one day she woke before sunrise to pack lunches and waited through long evenings where the only sound was the piano filling the space he should have occupied. Some nights he called too late. The children were asleep. Pauletta's voice, tired but steady, would reassure him. "We're fine, just hurry home." After hanging up, he would stare at the hotel ceiling and feel the strange loneliness of success. "I missed a lot of moments," he admitted later. "But she never made me feel like I had to earn her love again." In 1995, after 12 demanding years of marriage, they renewed their vows in South Africa. Under warm sunlight and the laughter of their children, he realized something simple yet life-changing. Love does not ask for perfection. It only asks that you return. Quietly, the real test of their marriage came not in poverty, but in triumph. But by the early 2000s, Denzel's face was everywhere. Training Day, Remember the Titans, Man on Fire. Fame followed him like a storm. Some nights he returned home after midnight, too exhausted to speak. One evening, after weeks away, he opened the front door and saw only one light glowing in the house. Pauletta sat by the window, half reading, half waiting. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. He whispered into the quiet, "I'm home." She didn't question him. She simply closed her book and said softly, "Then come sit." In that moment, something inside him shifted. Success suddenly felt fragile, almost hollow. Presence mattered more than applause. "She saved me," he would later say. Not with words, with patience. Slowly, he began reclaiming the ordinary moments he had nearly lost, driving the twins to school, cooking Sunday breakfasts, memorizing how she took her coffee. "We pray more than we argue," he once said with a gentle smile. That's the glue. Through those quiet rituals, they rebuilt what distance had threatened to erode. Their 4 children, John David, Katia, Malcolm, and Olivia, grew up surrounded by faith, music, and the steady rhythm of family life. Softly, after more than 4 decades together, their love no longer needs to prove anything. It simply remains. In their Beverly Hills home, mornings begin with scripture while Pauletta's piano drifts through the house like sunlight. Evenings bring the smell of food on the grill, gospel music in the background, and grandchildren racing across the garden chasing fireflies. The roar of Hollywood feels far away here. When journalists ask the secret of their marriage, Denzel only smiles. "Faith," he says simply. "That's the glue," But when he speaks about Pauletta, the emotion in his voice says more than the word itself. Everything I am, she helped me become. The world sees a cinematic legend, yet behind that legend stands a woman who believed when he doubted and steadied their home while fame tried to pull him away from it. Their life has known storms, distance, and moments that could have broken weaker bonds, yet each trial became another quiet lesson in grace. Some nights, when the city finally sleeps, Denzel steps outside beneath the Los Angeles sky and whispers a prayer of gratitude. Because after all the fame, awards, and applause, he understands the truth that took a lifetime to learn. Greatness may build a career, but the love that waits for you to come home is what builds the man. Cruelly, some friendships don't reveal their true weight until the day the world suddenly loses the voice that once filled it with light. In 1996, on the set of The Preacher's Wife, Denzel Washington discovered a bond that would stay with him far beyond the cameras. Opposite him stood Whitney Houston, a voice powerful enough to lift entire cathedrals with a single note. Between takes inside the church set, Whitney would often drift into old gospel hymns, her voice gliding through the rafters like light through stained glass. Crew members sometimes paused mid-task just to listen. Denzel would lean back, smiling with the quiet amusement of someone witnessing something extraordinary. "You don't even need a choir, Whitney. You are the choir." She would laugh, bright and effortless, tossing her head before replying, "Then you're the preacher making sure we all stay honest." Their connection was never romance and never spectacle. It was something deeper. Two artists linked by faith, humor, and the unspoken understanding that the same spotlight that elevates a life can also exhaust it. In the quiet spaces between scenes, they spoke about grace, endurance, and the strange loneliness that sometimes hides behind applause. What grew there was rare. A friendship built not on fame, but on trust. Devastatingly, that harmony shattered on a February afternoon in 2012 with news that seemed impossible to absorb. Whitney Houston had been found unresponsive in a bathtub in her suite at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles, the very hotel where the music industry had gathered for Clive Davis's pre-Grammy celebration later that evening. She was only 48. The shock rippled outward instantly, freezing millions in disbelief. Only months earlier, she had completed filming Sparkle, hoping it would mark a new chapter after years of scrutiny and struggle. Instead, it became her farewell. Behind the brilliance of that voice had lived a storm few truly saw. Relentless expectations, endless headlines, and the exhausting pressure of carrying a legend's weight. She wanted peace, Denzel would later say softly. She was pure talent. But the world never stopped pulling at her. Across America, candles flickered outside churches and record stores as strangers gathered in the cold evening air singing "I Will Always Love You." Radio stations fell silent before playing the song together, the sound of a nation mourning. At her funeral in Newark, on the church where Whitney first discovered her voice filled with choirs, cameras, and grief heavy enough to quiet the room. Stained glass light washed across the pews as Amazing Grace rose through the sanctuary. Denzel sat quietly near the back, head bowed, hands clasped, refusing the attention that followed him everywhere else. Under the swell of the choir, he murmured almost to himself, "She gave everything, and it cost her everything." When the service ended and the crowds drifted away, he lingered a moment longer, running his hand slowly along the wooden pew where she had once laughed during rehearsals, as if the echo of her voice might still live there. Quietly, the world moved on. But for him, the silence left behind never truly disappeared. In the weeks that followed, her memory returned again and again like a melody that refuses to fade. "I wish I had called her more," he admitted later, his voice carrying a rare weight of regret. "Told her how proud I was. I thought there would always be another day. That thought stayed with him long after the headlines passed. When interviewers spoke her name, his voice softened and his gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the cameras. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the people who shine the brightest carry the deepest weight." On the anniversary of her passing, he watched The Preacher's Wife again. When Whitney's voice filled the room singing, "I believe in you and me," time seemed to fold in on itself. For a moment, she was there again, laughing between takes, lifting a church set into song. He smiled through tears. "Love never dies," he said quietly. "It just changes keys." And perhaps that is the truest legacy she left behind. The stage may have gone silent, but the voice that once moved the world still finds its way back. In memory, in faith, and in the quiet moments when a song suddenly reminds us that some souls never truly leave. Astonishingly, some of the deepest wounds return not through failure, but through the loss of someone you once helped rise. Years after his career had reached heights few actors ever touch, Denzel Washington felt an old promise quietly return to his heart. The promise never to leave gratitude or love unspoken. That promise gained unexpected meaning the day he realized how profoundly a quiet act of kindness had shaped another life. The young man was Chadwick Boseman, then an emerging performer whose calm intensity carried both hunger and humility. Long before the world knew his name, Boseman had struggled to afford a prestigious summer acting program at Oxford. Unknown to him, far away and without publicity, Denzel had quietly helped cover the cost. No cameras, no speeches, just a late-night signature beneath the glow of a desk lamp. A simple act of faith in someone he had never met. Years later, when Boseman discovered the truth, he approached Denzel with emotion in his voice. "You didn't know me," he said softly, "but you made it possible for me to be here." Denzel's smile was gentle, almost shy. "That's what we're supposed to do," he replied. "Pass it on." Powerfully, that quiet act of belief became the thread connecting two generations of greatness. At the American Film Institute Life Achievement Award tribute to Denzel Washington, Boseman stepped onto the stage and spoke words that silenced the room. "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." The audience rose in applause, but Denzel lowered his head, humbled by the moment. It felt less like praise and more like a torch being passed. Yet even as the world crowned Boseman through films like Black Panther, few understood the private struggle unfolding behind the scenes. In 2016, he had been diagnosed with colon cancer. From that moment forward, the young actor carried his battle in silence, enduring surgeries, treatments, and exhaustion while continuing to work. Between takes, he sometimes closed his eyes, breathing slowly to gather strength. Still, he stepped onto the set again and again. 42, Get On Up, Marshall, and finally Black Panther. Each performance brighter than the last. Each one carried by a resilience the audience could not see. "He showed up," Denzel would later say with quiet admiration. "Every single day he showed up. The world saw strength. Only a few understood the price." Crushingly, the truth arrived in August 2020, when Chadwick Boseman had died at just 43. When Denzel first heard, the room around him seemed to fall strangely silent. The television repeated the words, but they refused to feel real. He had never known about the illness, not the treatments, not the quiet fight that had unfolded behind the scenes of those powerful performances. For a long moment, he simply sat there, absorbing what that silence had hidden. "He gave everything," Denzel later said softly. "He was grace." At a private memorial, without cameras or speeches, a gospel choir sang "Take My Hand, Precious Lord." Standing near the back pew, Denzel bowed his head as the music filled the sanctuary. "That's the thing about angels," he murmured. "They never tell you they're leaving." Later, alone in his home theater, he watched Black Panther once more. When the film ended and the screen faded to black, His reflection lingered in the glass. "Love never dies," he whispered. "It only changes form." And somewhere beyond the noise of the world, the young actor whose dream he had quietly helped protect had become something greater than fame. A symbol of courage, and a reminder that the smallest act of faith in another human being can echo far beyond the life that inspired it. Devastatingly, few losses cut deeper than losing the woman who not only gave you life, but guarded it when it was most fragile. For Denzel Washington, the passing of his mother, Lennis Washington, was not merely a farewell. It felt like the quiet closing of the chapter that built the man the world would one day admire. She had never been simply a mother. She was the compass that kept him from drifting toward the same corners that had already claimed so many boys in Mount Vernon. One memory still lives in him with painful clarity. 14 years old, restless and angry, standing in their small apartment while his mother folded his clothes into a worn suitcase. A soft gospel hymn floated from the radio. "You're sending me away?" he asked, trying to hide the fear beneath his voice. She closed the suitcase slowly and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I'm not sending you away," she said quietly. "I'm sending you forward." Then she added the words that would echo through every chapter of his life. "The world's gonna try to break you, Denny. Don't let it." At the time, he believed she had given up on him. Only years later did he understand the truth. She had rescued him. Every disciplined line he ever delivered, every careful decision he ever made, began in that small room beneath the sound of gospel music. Tenderly, even after the world knew his name, he remained her son first. No matter how full his schedule became, he still called her every Sunday. Sometimes she scolded him for being late. Other times she simply listened while he talked about work, faith, and the strange noise of Hollywood. "And she was the strongest woman I ever knew," he once said. "She didn't need much, just wanted me to walk right." When he bought her a house, she smiled and reminded him gently, "Nice place, but don't forget who laid the foundation." He never did. Every quiet prayer before stepping onto a film set, every act of generosity given without cameras, traced back to her. Then one day the calls stopped. The laughter that once greeted him through the phone was gone. Out of habit, he still poured 2 cups of coffee some mornings, and the second one remained untouched beside the first. Sometimes his hand still drifts toward the phone on Sundays before memory stops him. In interviews, he rarely said the word death. Instead, he would whisper, "She went home." To him, she had not disappeared. Her voice still moved quietly through the rooms of his memory, guiding him the way it always had. Quietly, that guidance still shapes the beginning of his days. Before sunrise in his Beverly Hills home, Denzel often wakes early, the discipline she once taught him. The smell of coffee fills the kitchen as he opens the Bible she loved and reads the Psalms that once echoed through their home. Some mornings the words blur, not from age, but from remembering. Closing the book, he looks toward the light rising beyond the window and smiles softly. "You were right, Ma," he murmurs. "God did have me." Morning sunlight spills into the room in warm gold, and for a brief moment the distance between past and present feels almost thin. In that light, he no longer feels the sharp edge of loss. He feels something steadier. The quiet strength of the woman who once stood between him and a life that might have disappeared. The world may see Denzel Washington as a... Suddenly, the strongest men discover that time does not shout. It whispers. After losing the woman who first taught him how to live, Denzel Washington began to hear those whispers in his own body. They appeared quietly. The dull ache in his hands after long days on set, the stiffness in his knees when the mornings turned cold. They weren't merely pain. They were reminders of distance traveled. For decades, he had outrun exhaustion, pushing through 16-hour shooting days, refusing to slow down even when his muscles begged for rest. But now, in his 70s, he no longer fought the passing of time. He greeted it. Aging, he once said thoughtfully, is not losing strength. It's gaining peace. There had been years when he could sprint across a set, leap over railings, and hang from balconies without hesitation. Now he pauses at the edge, takes a breath, and smiles at the difference. The man who once faced danger effortlessly on screen has developed a small, almost playful fear of heights. "If there's a scene up there," he joked once, pointing toward a rooftop, "let's shoot it first, before I start thinking too much." It isn't weakness, it's perspective. The kind only time can give. Unexpectedly, 2013 brought the moment when even an unbreakable man had to listen to his own heart. That year, he quietly underwent a routine heart procedure. He shrugged it off with a grin. Just maintenance. But beneath the humor was a humbling pause. In a hospital room washed in cold, fluorescent light, the steady beep of a monitor echoed beside him. For the first time in years, he lay still and listened to his own heartbeat. One beat, then the next. For a brief moment, he even counted them, just to be certain another would follow. "My mother used to tell me," he murmured once during recovery, "take care of your heart. That's where God speaks." I guess I finally listened. The days that followed felt almost sacred. Each breath was deliberate. Each sunrise felt like mercy. When doctors cleared him to leave, he stepped outside into warm afternoon sunlight with quiet gratitude. Instead of thinking about scripts or premieres, his mind drifted to simpler blessings. His children's laughter, the warmth of his wife's voice, the smell of coffee in the morning kitchen. That evening, he stood in his backyard grilling dinner while soft gospel music floated through the trees. Looking toward the sky, he whispered a simple prayer. Still here, still grateful. Gradually, and the scar on his chest became less a wound than a reminder of grace. Years later on the set of The Equalizer and its sequels, he worked through long days with movements slower but steadier. "These movies don't get easier," he once told a friend with a quiet laugh. "But neither do the blessings." Sometimes between scenes, he pressed his hand lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his palm like a promise that had been renewed. His mornings changed. Scripture before sunrise, long walks through the garden, prayer that lingered longer than before. Youth was no longer something to chase. Time had become a companion walking beside him. Occasionally, he would pause before the mirror, trace the faint line where doctors once repaired his heart, and smile gently. "That's not a scar," he said once. "That's a reminder. A reminder that when life slows you down, it isn't always trying to break you. Sometimes it's teaching you how to breathe again." Now when the sun rises over Beverly Hills, Denzel Washington walks slowly through his garden while the city hums far below. For the boy who once feared losing direction, the actor who once defied gravity, and the man who once carried the weight of expectation, time has softened its voice. It is no longer an enemy to outrun. It is a quiet companion. And with each step, he gives thanks, not for what time has taken, but for what it has allowed him to keep: faith, peace, and the grace to keep moving forward. In 2026, at 71, Denzel Washington lives with the quiet steadiness of a man who has already survived the loudest storms. The legend is still there, the unmistakable voice, the commanding posture, the watchful eyes. But age has softened the rhythm of his life into something wiser. He is still married to Pauletta Washington, the woman he met on the set of Wilma and married in 1983. And their bond remains one of the most admired long marriages in modern Hollywood. Together they raised 4 children who are no longer celebrity kids, but accomplished adults in their own right. John David Washington first chased a career in professional football before stepping fully into acting and proving he belonged there with performances in BlacKkKlansman, Tenet, and The Piano Lesson. Katia Washington built her path behind the camera as a producer, while Malcolm Washington emerged as a filmmaker and made his feature directorial debut with The Piano Lesson. Olivia Washington also pursued acting, shaping a career with discipline rather than noise. What stands out most is that Denzel did not raise his children to worship fame. He raised them to respect work, faith, and character. People close to him often say that when he speaks about his family, the movie star disappears and only the father remains. Financially, his life reflects reward without recklessness. Denzel Washington's net worth is widely estimated at around $300 million. Built across decades of starring roles, directing, producing, and carefully managed earnings rather than celebrity excess. During peak years, he was routinely among Hollywood's best-paid actors, with reported film salaries often reaching $20 million or more, and in especially active years, his combined acting and producing income climbed far higher. Yet the more revealing part of his wealth is his attitude toward it. He has long treated money less as a scoreboard than as responsibility. Something useful only if it creates freedom, security, and opportunity for other people. That philosophy shows up most clearly in his philanthropy. For more than 3 decades, he has served as a national spokesperson for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, often crediting the organization with helping redirect his own life when he was young. He has also supported theater education at Fordham University and contributed to major educational initiatives, including a $1 million commitment that helped revive the historic debate program at Wiley College. Over the years, he has donated millions toward scholarships, mentorship programs, church communities, and theater training. The pattern is unmistakable. His generosity is rarely theatrical, but it is real, repeated, and deeply aligned with who he is. He does not merely speak about lifting younger people. He invests in their futures. The places he calls home reveal even more about his values. The Washington family has long lived primarily in the private hills of Beverly Hills, where their main estate sits inside one of the city's quiet gated communities. The property is widely described as a grand Mediterranean-style residence with roughly 30,000 square feet of living space, surrounded by tall trees and carefully designed gardens that shield it from public view. Depending on estimates, the estate's value has been placed somewhere between $50 million and $80 million, making it one of the most valuable private residences associated with a Hollywood actor. Inside, the house includes multiple family wings, a large library lined with books and film scripts, a private screening theater, expansive living areas for gatherings, and a gym where Denzel continues his disciplined training. Outside, the property stretches across landscaped lawns, a large swimming pool area, tennis courts, guest houses, and walking paths where he often begins his mornings. The design favors warmth rather than flash. Arched windows, stone corridors, wooden beams, and quiet corners that feel closer to a retreat than a celebrity mansion. The family has also owned other high-value properties over the years, including residences on the East Coast closer to his New York roots. Yet for all its luxury, the estate serves primarily as sanctuary, a place where grandchildren now run freely across the lawn, while gospel music sometimes drifts through open windows. His approach to luxury extends even to the cars he drives. Unlike celebrities who collect dozens of exotic supercars, Denzel has typically favored a smaller, refined selection. Over the years, he has been associated with vehicles such as a Rolls-Royce Phantom, valued around $450,000, a Bentley Continental GT worth approximately $200,000, and luxury SUVs like the Range Rover Autobiography, estimated near $150,000. He has also been seen driving understated American sedans rather than attention-grabbing sports cars. For him, vehicles are tools of comfort rather than displays of ego. Health and routine now occupy more of his focus as well. After undergoing a heart procedure years ago, he became even more disciplined about caring for his body. His mornings often begin with stretching, light weight training, and long walks through his garden. The posture that once dominated movie screens remains unmistakable, though the pace of his movements has grown calmer with age. The voice is still deep and steady, the gaze focused, but the smile carries a warmth that speaks of a man who no longer needs to prove anything. Professionally, he remains active even in his 70s. The later chapters of his career have included the continuation of the Equalizer franchise, major theatrical performances, and directing work that allows him to mentor younger artists entering the industry. In recent years, he has appeared in major productions including Gladiator II and returned to the stage in high-profile performances such as Othello, reminding audiences that his roots as a stage actor remain central to his craft. He continues to attend major film festivals, industry gatherings, and charitable events where his presence commands respect across generations of filmmakers. Younger actors frequently describe meeting him as one of the defining moments of their careers. Yet when he speaks publicly, he rarely talks about fame. Instead, he speaks about responsibility, on discipline and purpose. As he once told a room full of aspiring performers, "The stage is temporary, character is permanent." And that may ultimately explain why Denzel Washington remains so widely respected. Audiences admire the awards, the unforgettable performances, and the extraordinary longevity of his career. But what truly endures is the integrity behind it. He rose from hardship without forgetting humility. He achieved enormous success without abandoning loyalty to his family. He faced loss, pressure, and decades of expectation, yet continued to choose faith, discipline, and honesty. His life quietly demonstrates that greatness does not always shout. Sometimes it walks calmly through the world and lifts others along the way. If his story has inspired you, share your thoughts below about the moment in his journey that touched you most. And if you believe stories like this still matter, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so more people can discover them. May Denzel Washington's path remind all of us that talent can open doors, but character keeps them open. And may your own journey be guided by the same courage, faith, and quiet strength that carried him from uncertain streets to a life of lasting influence.